Yeah, and you already mentioned process dev a couple times, but some people
Yes.
that watch this video might not even know what this is. Do you quickly want to summarize what process dev on Android is and why it's important and what happens if you ignore it?
Yeah, so process that on Android is when you have an app, you go onto any screen you want, somewhere in the middle. Let's say you are on a detail screen coming from a list screen. And so you were on a detail screen, you put it in background, you take a picture of your food, you post it on Slack, you maybe even put it on Instagram, I don't know. You come back to your application and Android will have most likely, because of just the camera and Slack maybe, Android kills the process of your application to reclaim memory, because it's like, well, you're not being used, so why don't you give me my resources back? So it kills your process, but it saves the activity task records and whatever is stored there. So within the activity task records, they store the fragment state and they store anything that you return from on save instance state. And this is what the saved instance state is when you have activity on create. This is what it is. So what happens then is that you come back to your application, and what happens is that it will be as if it had been running for the very first time, like it's never been executed before. All your static variables, if you have any, or your singletons, they are nulled out. The application is recreated from scratch, but the activity task records are used to restore the activities and their state. So what happens is that you start the screen, the save instance state is not null, even though this is the very first execution of the app. And from there, you can restore it. So you end up on the detail screen, and as you navigate back, then this is the very first time that you have ever been on this list screen. It has never existed before during this execution of the process, right? So what you need to consider when writing an Android app is that no matter what screen you are on, it can potentially be the very first screen that executes in your app. It is the first screen, no matter where it is. And only what is saved either on disk or in the saved instance state is what will be kept alive. So anything that you put in a singleton or something floating in the air, that will be null. And if you don't restore it, nobody will, okay? So as such, you need to consider this. And this is where a lot of null pointer exceptions used to come from. That people were like, I don't want to use intents and fragment arguments. I can just set this static variable because I've always been on this screen, because how else would I get to this other screen? But the answer to that is that, well, after process that other screen is the very first screen to have ever executed. The previous one never did. This is a new process. None of your variables exist anymore. None of your state exists, only what you saved.
So as an example, people can go to a detail screen in the app and they put the app in the background, open a camera or whatever, go back into the app, and then this detail screen could be, the whole app could be recreated basically, but we start on the detail screen.
Yes.
And if you send a piece of data to this detail screen, like the ID from which you get the object itself, then if this is not properly stored, then this is lost and you basically don't have this information anymore. And then you have this detail screen open, but not an item that you can actually display. And I guess in best cases, it would just show an empty screen, I guess. In worst case, it would crash. Or is it?
Most likely crash.
Yeah, most likely crash.
So yeah, the solution to this problem though, or at least as it is intended, is to pass the ID as like either an intent extra or a fragment argument, or as part of the root now with navigation compose.
Those are also sent again after process dev, those arguments.
The arguments are restored, like they are part of the activity task record. So the two things that are restored as such, sorry, I said one earlier, but it's technically two things, the saved instance state and the arguments. So intents are restored, and other than that, the fragment arguments are managed by the fragment manager, so that is restored accordingly with that. So yeah, the application can restart anywhere. And some people might say, hold on a second, I can fix this problem super easily. I will just prevent Android from remembering everything and just always launch from the very first screen. And I'm sure this works to some degree in some cases, but not only is it a horrible UX, but imagine that you are within a login flow, and this is real. It actually happened in a real app. I had to revise the navigation in that app because they were just discarding all states across process that. And there was a registration flow. And in that flow, you would get an email that would describe your verification code. And you would probably press home, go to Gmail, check your code, you went back, and you want to input it. And I have seen process that happen in that short amount of time.
Yeah.
So if your process does not correctly manage this, then you will lose either the states from the previous screens because you either didn't pass them through an argument, or you don't have a shared model, a shared scope where your state is persisted and restored, as you would with navgraph scope view models or with like the scoping mechanism in SimpleStack, as mentioned earlier. So this would be lost. This is one thing. But if you just throw out all the screens, then you got this email, you have this pending registration, and now you have to input your user email and your password again and go through the same loop. And unless you know that you can like use multi-window mode, assuming that the developers didn't say resizable activity false, you can enable multi-window mode and keep both the activities alive, like both apps alive.
Or another option is that you get the email and see it in your notification shade, but that's not always the case. It depends on your
Sometimes
email
it just
settings.
doesn't fit, so you want to click it. And then that alone was enough. Okay.
Yeah, I just want to clarify a few things. The system automatically opens the same screen we were on before and not the starting screen after process dev. This happens automatically, right? No matter if you use fragments or composables.
Yes.
So when you were on the detail screen and the process is destroyed, you open the app again, then we don't end up on the starting screen. Instead, we get to the same detail screen we were on before. Just that the information is lost if you didn't save it properly.
Yeah.
And also, people might think, but isn't this what a Jetpack view model is for? But no, Jetpack view models are also completely lost in the process dev. They only cover configuration changes and restore data when you, for example, rotate the device. But process dev, the view model also completely loses its state. But first of all, is this actually still realistic on modern devices that have a lot of memory?
This thing has 4 gigabytes of RAM. I experience process that all the time.
Yeah, I think I
Yes.
do that too. I don't really pay attention to that. But one thing I notice is that I often have my FitnessPal open where I track my food, and I put it in the background, and I often start again at the screen I didn't know. I don't know, at the top of the screen, I guess. But I don't know if this was related to process dev at all. But
It's possible.
But it still happens. And yeah, as you already said, these arguments, navigation arguments, are restored automatically. But the easiest way for me to usually get or usually store data across process dev is by using the saved state handle in the view model. So do you want to talk about that for a moment?
Oh, definitely, yes. So the save state handle is pretty much a necessity addition to view model, because back in 2017 when view model came out, they did not support any direct callbacks like on save state, on restore state or this kind of thing in view model, which I did think was a design oversight. But it took until 2020 January for the view model save state integration to come out. So the way that works is that instead of a callback, you get this thing called a save state handle, which internally is a map of things. You set stuff on it, theoretically, and those things are going to be saved when saving needs to be done. So that's how save state handle is intended to work, or at least that's what you would assume based on set and get. But the real way to use the correct and intended way to use save state handle is to use this method called SaveStateHandle.getLiveData. And the way that works is that you pass it an initial argument, which it uses only at initialization, and afterwards any changes you make to this live data will be saved in the background when saving needs to happen, but it will also be restored in this live data this way. And it's quite fascinating, really, because it's a mutable live data. So in each of these save state handle get live data, mutable live datas, anything you put into them will be saved across process that. And this way, what you can end up with, due to the properties of live data and the power of mediator live data, is that if any of these properties change, which are used as the foundation of, like, for example, retrieving data from the database, like the current selected ID, the current search text inputted by the user, all that, this sort of stuff. This is all coming and connected to the save state handle. And after that, you can use this live data as a reactive source, so that you can either combine them with mediator live data. I have a library for that. We should totally add it to the description later. So you can combine them. You can also use switch map, and you can use like the coroutine live data, for example.
And you can turn that into flows.
You can also turn them into flows, that also works, and then use them as flows and then use combined with flows, all that stuff, that all works. So as such, you suddenly enabled yourself to reactive state management, while also making sure that the state that needs to be saved and restored is automatically saved and restored. So I think that's really cool, actually. And for some reason, I don't see it used as often as I would like. I especially didn't see it as much in Google sample code as I would have liked. They typically use get and set, but I think that's harder to keep in sync. So I would recommend using get live data.
Yeah, people have to understand that even if they want to get rid of live data and use flow between the view model and the UI layer instead, they still have to use this get live data method to store this flow in the saved state handle, right? So that's not really getting around this.
Yeah. Like I saw a trick where for each property that they want to get from the save state handle, they set up a flow that if they modify this mutable state flow, then it saves it with .set into the save state handle, and it uses the get for initialization. But for example, if someone were to call save state handle set with the same string key elsewhere, then they would not be notified of it. So using get live data is safer, and as such, as long as the save state handle doesn't offer an API that says get as state flow or get state flow or something like that, and you get live data, you will be stuck with live data if you use Jetpack UModel and you want behaviorally correct applications.
I usually turn them into flows, and then if I want to use a flow in the view model, then I just call get live data and then call sFlow on this result, and then it's a flow basically. But some people think that they can just put mutable state flows, or now we've composed just mutable state into their view models, and this is enough. But this probably means that your app will misbehave if you put it in the background for a while, earlier or later, because you're not handling process dev. Again, I show how get live data with the saved state handle works in the MVVM to-do list example. Again, the link is in the description. And I also wanted to mention that you automatically get, when you use the navigation Jetpack library, then the navigation arguments are automatically put into this saved state handle in your view model. So this is also a really nice way to get a handle to these arguments without having to call a method from your fragment or composable on your view model first. So let's say you navigate to a detail screen and you send the ID of your object over that you want to show, then you can get this ID out of the saved state handle right inside your view model without having to extract it from the fragment or the composable first.